To help pass the car time on our trip through Southern California, we ranked the 38 national parks according to funability. What is funability, you ask? It's the amount of fun we each had at the park. So we each ranked the parks and then daughter added them all up. It's like golf. Lowest score wins. Let's jump into it. These first few, well, they're tier 5. Do we have to get out of the car? Number 38 is Petrified Forest. We showed up to the Visitor Center around noon on a hot day in the middle of June after driving for 16 hours the previous day. None of us were in great spirits, and this place offered rocks, sand, and very little shade. We stayed for about 2 hours and moved on towards the Grand Canyon. Number 37, Indiana Dunes. Personally, I don't know why this is a national park, but we stopped here after driving all night from the Mall of America in Minnesota. I was exhausted. We saw the sunrise. We didn't see any other people. We walked along the beach, we saw some deer, and we left after a few hours. Number 36 is Kings Canyon. This one is tough because we visited here after Yosemite, and really, what park could follow that up? We spent a day around the General Grant area looking at giant sequoias and eating lunch at the restaurant. We were too tired to drive down into the valley, but got a great view from the Junction overlook. Number 36, Biscayne, just outside of Miami. I'm sure if you have a boat and scuba diving equipment, this park is amazing. But we're on a budget, and so we walked around here for a few hours and called it a day. They do have a nice trail where you can walk along the shoreline and the mangroves, but that's really about all that we saw. Number 34 is Saguaro in southern Arizona. This was at the start of our trip, and we were all really excited to be there, and then we got out of the car and melted. Now, for those that don't know, there are 2 parts to this park that are about 45 minutes away from each other, and we only visited the west side of the park. There is very little shade on hikes around Saguaro, but the visitor center was nice, and those cacti were still amazing to see. There's a tie for 32nd, and first up is Mesa Verde, which is a bummer for me because I had been looking forward to this one for years. We tent camped for a night here and drove all around, but I'm going to chalk up this low ranking to COVID. We visited in 2021, and the rangers used this summer to replace the road closest to the cliff dwellings, and so they weren't leading any tours down to the cliff. I was really disappointed. I'm sure if we went back, this one would climb up the list significantly. And tied with Mesa Verde is Hot Springs. A rule I should have said at the beginning is that we're only counting actual time in the park, not the trip or the city or other fun things to do around the park. See, we live in Arkansas, and we love traveling to Hot Springs, and we've been to this park probably the most. We enjoy the hiking, the baths, and just the overall vibe at this park. And we'll close down this tier with another park we visited a lot, number 31, the Gateway Arch. We lived in St. Louis for over a decade, so the arch is a part of our family landscape. My favorite memory is the night they wouldn't let us leave the museum because of a tornado warning. Everything was okay, but it was wild to be forced to stay in a national park. The renovations from a few years ago really improved the museum, but I still think this would make a better national monument than park. And there's a tie for 29th place. First up is Congaree in South Carolina. We only had about 3 hours in this park, and we enjoyed our walk along the boardwalk behind the visitor center. In that short time, we heard and saw several different animals. However, it is a big giant swamp, and it was teeming with mosquitoes. And also with 112 points is Great Smoky Mountain in Tennessee. This was our first trip to a national park, so we didn't get to go on many of the hikes, and honestly, the kids had more fun in Gatlinburg than in the park. But we did see several waterfalls, and we found quite calm places to appreciate the beauty. We especially liked Clingman's Dome. That brings us to Tier 4. These are the parks that could have been so much better. There's so much potential, but for whatever reason, things didn't work out too well. First up is Mammoth Cave in Kentucky. This was our first of the national park caves, so there were a lot of expectation and anticipation, but we were underwhelmed. It's a one-trick pony park. Sure, you can camp and hike a little, but you only go there for the cave. And you aren't allowed to go spelunking on your own. They have all these tours where you're with a big group of people. It felt kind of weird for a national park. It would have been better if they had a trail in the cave where we could all just walk on our own. Number 27, Capitol Reef in southern Utah. We stopped here on our way from Bryce Canyon to Moab, so we only had a few hours. The positives were the tasty pies we bought at the park, seeing the petroglyphs, and then wading in this tiny little creek. The negatives, it was crazy hot and spread out. This became a national park in 1971, but I get the feel the National Park Service hasn't invested much in this one. They could do a better job of setting up trails and then communicating where they are. Just not as good as other parks that we've been to. And we've got a tie for 25th. First are the Everglades. We were expecting pythons and alligators dripping onto the road, but we didn't see any cool wildlife until the tide came in and we saw manatees. They were by far the highlight of the park. Originally, we were going to bike along Shark Valley Road, but after spending a rather boring day in the heat and humidity of the park, we decided it just wasn't worth it. And tied with the Everglades, Rocky Mountain. We took the shuttle to Bear Lake and hiked to Bierstadt Lake. It was a beautiful hike. Now, in a lot of lists like this, people often have Rocky Mountain in their top 10, but it's all the way down to 25 for us. The truth is we only had one day, and it was at the end of a very long trip. So we were all pretty tired and not really looking too much to explore the park. So I guess this one's as much our fault as anything. But I'm sure if we were to go back and visit, this park would go up the list quite a bit. Number 24 is a park I didn't think we'd ever visit, Great Basin in Nevada. It's in the middle of nowhere, but it has a cave, a mountain peak, ponderosa pines that smell like cream soda, and bristlecone pines, supposedly the oldest living things on the planet. The cave tour was short and sweet, and we loved the hike up to the pine trees. The weather was perfect. The only way this could have been better was if we had more time to climb Wheeler Peak. Number 23 is Pinnacles in California. Now there are two roads that enter this park, but they don't meet up. So if you're camping, you want to stay on the east side. This one could have been better if the best hike, Bear Gulch Cave, was open, but it was closed due to mating bats. We still enjoyed the Moses Spring Trail with its variety and beautiful overlooks. The campsite area was really nice and included a pool. We stayed in a giant tent, and I loved the morning turkey run. We didn't see any of the California condors, but this still is a beautiful park. Number 22 is the most controversial park we visited, Guadalupe Mountains in Texas. This park has the tallest peak in Texas, but also some terrible winds. The first day, we hiked the Smith Stream hike, and the second day was a really cool hike called Devil's Hall. The sunset was gorgeous, the stargazing was perfect. The hard part? That night, we tent camped, and we had 40 to 70 mile an hour winds all night. It destroyed our tent so badly, we had to throw it away. So this park can be really cool, but also extremely hazardous if you're not prepared and you're in a tent. Now we get to Tier 3. Seriously, great parks with amazing adventures and memories. Now that doesn't mean the previous parks weren't cool, but I wouldn't plan a trip just to visit the parks we've already mentioned. These top 21 parks, however, worth a trip all by themselves. Number 21, Sequoia in the Sierra Nevada mountains of California. This is a well-oiled machine, National Park Service. The Lodgepole area has a great visitor center, restaurants, a good market. It even has a laundromat. And an excellent shuttle that brought us to Morro Rock. What a great view! Then we hiked the Soldiers Trail through a sequoia grove with a stop for lunch on Tunnel Log because why not? After a little more hiking, we ended the day with a feet soak in freezing cold water. It was an incredible day in Sequoia. Number 20 is Big Bend on the Texas-Mexico border. We planned a tent camp for a few nights in March, but they got a snowstorm our first night and we ended up in a hotel. But this park is diverse. Where else can you get a picture of a cactus with snow? We walked around Chisos Basin in the mountains and then drove down to the valley where the snow disappeared. We made it to the Rio Grande River for lunch on an international border and then walked through the Santa Elena Canyon. Such an enjoyable visit. That brings us to number 19, Death Valley in California. Our plan was to play on the sand dunes all day, but it was 121 degrees during the day, and that was beyond sweltering. Like, it kinda hurt to breathe. So we checked into the ranch, which is in the national park, and we couldn't believe how nice it is. We spent several hours at the spring-fed pool. It was refreshing. We headed to Zabriskie Point for sunset, and then to Badwater Basin where we had it all to ourselves. Now it was still 118 degrees, but with the sun down, and this is weird to say, it was manageable. This is the first park we visited where you can't really go check out the park until after sunset. Number 18 is our favorite cave, Carlsbad on the New Mexico-Texas border. This is another one-trick pony park, but they know how to sell it. The entrance to the cave is iconic, and the areas in the cave are beautifully lit. But the highlight? You can go on your own without a group tour or a ranger watching you. All four of us agree this is the best cave in the national park system. Number 17 is Bryce Canyon in Utah. The colors here alone make this place a must visit. We walked the Navajo Loop on a gorgeous day, and you could spend a day just walking all the different trails in this canyon, as long as you end up at Wall Street, one of the coolest places at a national park. Number 16 is Canyonlands, also in Utah. This was one of my personal favorites. Our day started with a hike in the dark so we could get the sunrise shot through Mesa Arch. Then the Gooseberry Trail down an old waterfall cliff. It was epic. We only visited the Island in the Sky section of this park, but it's a goal to get back for the Needles and the Maze. Number 15 is the world-famous Grand Canyon in Arizona. We spent 3 nights tent camping on the North Rim, which was incredible. The North Rim is more remote and cooler than the South Rim, so that was much more our jam. We especially loved the sunsets. We hiked a few miles down on the Kaibab Trail, and we ran into someone we know from St. Louis. And Cape Royal had the most surreal portraits of the canyon. Number 14 is Channel Islands in California. After looking at this list, I realized this southern Midwest family really likes island parks. We've been to 5, and this is the lowest ranked one. We took a ferry from Ventura to Santa Cruz for the day to explore the largest Channel Island, and the hiking turned out to be more rigorous and breathtaking than we imagined. We enjoyed the ferry ride, being trolled by dolphins, and eating our lunch by a curious fox. Number 13 is the Great Sand Dunes of Colorado. Wow! Was this fun, and there's potential for it to be even better. We tent camped here for a night and got to enjoy the dunes at sunset. The shadows were fun to photograph. The next day of sledding down the dunes and just playing in the sand was a free playground. The only drawback was that in the heat of the day, the sand felt so hot you can't walk on it. We had to learn that, unfortunately, the hard way. Number 11 has a tie. First are the Grand Tetons in Wyoming, another one of my personal favorites. We spent a few nights here so we could explore, and the views were amazing no matter where we were in the park. Jenny Lake and Inspiration Point were incredible, and we didn't even mind the rain. We saw bald eagles, beavers, elk, bison, and even a grizzly bear pup. And I must add, on the south side of the park, the deli makes my all-time favorite sandwiches best in the USA. And also at number 11, Dry Tortugas in Florida, the second of our island parks. This one you have to take a ferry from Key West out to Fort Jefferson, which is an old Army Pentagon thing. Can you imagine being stationed out here 150 years ago? We had the day to explore the fort, take in the views, and go snorkeling. The ferry ride was high-end and the weather was perfect.